Okay, so good afternoon. Welcome to the Garden Hour with MU Extension. We're so glad that every one of you can join us today. We have lots of great information. My name is Donna Aufdenberg. I'm your host for today. I'm down in the Southeast region, down by Cape Girardeau. Like I said, we have lots of great information for you today, so hopefully you'll enjoy it. Let me get to the state map. Well, if I can get my computer to work. Okay, there we go. So here's the state map, and you might take a look and see who is in your area that is your contact person. We do have a new horticulturist in the St. Louis area, so I'd like to give a big welcome to Eli Isley. And today we have several that will be presenting. Among them is Justin Kay, Debbie Kelly, Kelly McGowan, and me, of course, and then Pat Guinan. He is going to do the weather. Justin has changed his name to Ask Your Questions Here. So if at any time during this hour you have questions, you can send them to him. So just go over to the chat and go to Ask Your Questions Here, and you can just type away. Make sure to put your email address in there. So just in case we don't have time to answer your questions, somebody will be in touch with you soon. We are going to start with the weather report. So Pat, take it away.
Sounds good, Donna. Thank you. And good afternoon, everyone. I'll get right into it. Well, the disparities continue to grow as we go into the heart of July. And those disparities are related to water, precipitation. We had another system here in the upper left. Last week, we had some systems impact northern Missouri, especially with some significant rainfall. And unfortunately, much of the rest of the state missed out on that significant rainfall. But look at some of these totals. According to the shades here on the radar estimates, anything yellow is more than 2 inches of rain, even 3 to 4, over 5 inches in some of these redder areas around St. Joe and generally around Monroe County, parts of north central Missouri. They did get some decent rainfall. Another little pocket here in west central sections, not as much as they saw in northern Missouri, but any amount will help. And unfortunately, little to any significant rainfall across much of the rest of the state. On the right, these are actual totals. I just really want to put into context on this dry drought that has emerged across the southern 2/3 of Missouri. Look at the differences in these green dots across northern Missouri. This is rainfall for about the past 6 weeks, beginning June 2nd and up through this morning. They're saying what drought in northern Missouri? We see totals of 7, 8, over 10 inches. Over the past 42 days, nearly a foot of rain just northeast of St. Joe. Things are lush, things are green across northern Missouri. But unfortunately, as you head south, things tank quickly. Look at some of these meager totals over nearly a 6-week period. Less than 2 inches in some areas here in west central sections of Missouri. Right here in the city of Columbia, we've only had about 1.125 inches since early June. Look at these totals in south central Missouri, less than a 1/2 inch, 3,300ths in West Plains. A trace since June 2nd in southwestern Ripley County, right on the Arkansas border. When you see those low totals over 6 weeks in the heart of summer, that's just not good. Obviously, a drought impacting much of the southern half of the state, and the forecast doesn't look very encouraging, especially as we go into next week. Not a good situation. Just to give an idea on the haves and the have-nots, I put up some dew point temperatures from the Missouri Mesonet. This is just from a few minutes ago. These are the dew points, which is the temperature at which the air becomes saturated. Obviously, across northern Missouri, where conditions are much greener and more lush, we're seeing some evaporative loss from transpiration from the plants and vegetation, as well as soil moisture evaporating. That actually creates a little bit of a more humidity, higher dew points. And so we have dew points in the mid-60s, low to mid-60s, but as you go into the drier areas of the southern 2/3 of the state, those dew points are only in the 50s. It feels a little bit more comfortable, but we're losing a lot of water to evaporation. And you start to see those microclimatic influences of a drought where humidities are lower because of the very dry conditions, but we have a little bit more moisture in the atmosphere because there really is no drought stress across northern Missouri. So it's interesting to note what drought can do and the environmental influences it can have on other variables when things get really dry. You create a desert-like environment, and so temperatures can go out of control when it comes to high temperatures. That's why I would not be surprised next week to see some of these drier areas. They could perhaps reach triple digits if we don't get any significant rain soon. This is the forecast we're getting over the next 5 days. Temperatures for highs today generally in the low 90s, mid 80s across parts of northeastern Missouri. Very seasonable for this time of year. So we get a little bit of a break. And we had a pleasant morning this morning with lows generally in the 50s and 60s across the state. That was very nice to feel. Low temperatures tonight will generally drop into the 60s across the state. A gradual warming trend as we go into Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, especially across southwest Missouri, with those temperatures by Thursday and on into Friday could be in the mid to upper 90s, persisting into Saturday. Maybe some rain chances. I think our best rain chances will be on Saturday night into Sunday morning. Hopefully that will occur. We'll see. Low temperatures over the next few days will generally be in the upper 60s to the low 70s. So somewhat seasonable for this time of year, considering climatologically, we are entering the hottest time of year for Missouri, generally the latter half of July. Lower left, there are rain chances for the weekend. We have an upper air pattern where that ridge of high pressure is currently over the Rockies. That puts us in a northwest slow pattern. There are indications of a disturbance riding along that ridge, dipping to the southeast, perhaps creating a complex of thunderstorms. The highest likelihood, again, will be Saturday night into Sunday morning. We can only hope that we see this because we need the rain badly across the southern 2/3 of the state. So just keep an eye on the sky, and hopefully we'll see some more rainfall as we go into, again, this weekend. Saturday night and Sunday morning are the best chances. Unfortunately, that ridge of high pressure that's currently parked over the Rockies is forecast to migrate eastward back over the central U.S., bringing those hot temperatures, a little bit more humidity with some Gulf of Mexico moisture, perhaps trying to get into the state. That will increase the heat indices, but it looks like back into the oven starting next week with some pretty hot temperatures. This is the forecast of over the next 7 days of precipitation. It's a pessimistic forecast. They're not really indicating any significant rainfall. I am hoping I'm going to try to be a little bit more optimistic that complex of storms forecasted for Saturday night and Sunday emerges across the central plains and rolls southeastward across the state. But as of now, at least according to this forecast, it only looks like the best chances for heavier precip will be to our east, generally a ½ inch or so. But again, these northwesterly flow forecasts are notoriously hard to pinpoint. So hopefully this will change as we go closer into Saturday and Sunday for some heavier totals. So my fingers are crossed on us receiving that rainfall. Next week does not look good, unfortunately. These patterns tend to stick around and when in the heart of summer, and they are forecasting that ridge to slide back into the central part of the country, a high likelihood of above normal temperatures. So I would expect high temperatures next week to be well into the 90s in those drier areas across southern Missouri, perhaps into the low 100s. And on the right, the more concerning picture that I see here is the forecast of below normal precipitation. Just not what we want to see considering where we are now with the drought. I do want to encourage, I just have a couple more slides here. We have an opportunity to provide drought assessments and impact information that are very useful for decision makers, not only at the state level, but at the national level. I've always said, who knows a drought better than a person who is living in that affected area? Please feel free to go to this website. The University of Nebraska, the National Drought Mitigation Center, has a website where we can participate in the drought assessment process. That is, we can provide impact reports of what we are witnessing, what we are seeing on the ground from our location. On the right, you go to this website, you click on submit a report, you fill out some information on what you're experiencing. You can upload pictures. These are just pictures that were sent by an agronomy specialist last week from Oregon County. Parts of Oregon County have seen less than a quarter of an inch of rain since June 2nd. And look at the impacts we're seeing. Pastures are burned up. They put some seed for Bermuda grass back on May 29th, and this is what's happened. Nothing. There is no moisture. Basically, all we're seeing are weeds and crabgrass across. So things are already looking really bad across parts of southern Missouri. This is a report that just came today from Callaway County, just east of Columbia here. They're having some issues with the ornamental conifers that are the pine, fir, and the spruce. Several of the mature trees are starting to die because of this dryness. Again, I think the most vulnerable time of year for drought here in Missouri generally is from about the middle part of May to the middle part of August, and we're right in the middle of a bad situation, unfortunately. I encourage, again, please, there's a QR code. You can submit these reports with information. Here is the last slide showing some of the reports that are starting to trickle in of the impacts we're seeing. So the drought monitor map does indicate severe drought, generally from Howell County over into parts of Oregon and Ripley County. Some moderate drought. The new drought monitor map will be coming out tomorrow. And unfortunately, I do think they are going to show more expansion of this moderate drought condition for much of southern Missouri and perhaps even in parts of central Missouri. Donna, that's pretty much a weather report. I'm sad to report we do need the rain, but nonetheless, it is what it is. Thank you so much, and I'll hand it back over to you.
Thank you, Pat. I know I've heard from a lot of gardeners that are struggling to keep up. One thing I can advise is if you are having to water, just make a schedule. You're watering this area one day, next area the next day, and that's how I'm doing it at home. So everything has their day of getting water, and that way you're not overwhelmed by it. And so anyhow, let's keep going. And like I said, thank you, Pat. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Kelly as your moderator.
All right. Thank you very much, Donna. And I'll report here in the Springfield area. Boy, it is really dry. We haven't had a good rain in weeks. It's awful. We've had a few storms go through the area, but they break up before they get to us. And it's kind of heartbreaking when that happens. So hopefully we'll have some rain soon. Okay, well, let's get into our questions for today. And the first question is, do bugs or butterflies need or use hostas? I am wanting to plant something under a tree that is shady for most of the day, but does receive some afternoon sun. And I want plants to be beneficial, not just ornamental. Okay, so a couple of things about this question. I've grown hostas for years, and one of the things that I love about hostas is that when they do bloom, the flowers are very attractive to hummingbirds and butterflies and bees and all kinds of pollinators. So they do provide a food source for these things. And they're a wonderful shade plant on top of that. I will mention, though, I would be a little hesitant to plant flowers or any kind of plants around the base of a tree. And the reason is because the plants that you plant around the base of a tree are going to steal water away from that tree, especially in a period like we're in right now, where every bit of water counts and trees are struggling too. And whenever we have periods of drought like this, we may not see the effect on trees for 2 or 3 years down the road. So I encourage you to plant hostas. They're a great shade plant, but you might consider planting them somewhere else and then sit back and enjoy all of the pollinators that will visit those flowers. So I hope that helps to answer that question. Okay, our next question is, I used shredded oak leaves as mulch around my newly installed hummingbird garden, which included mostly native plants. Now some of my young plants are dying. Could it have anything to do with the leaf mulch? Justin, what do you think about this?
Thanks, Kelly. So there's often concerns when using different organic mulches and different leaves, how they might impact soil pH. And I often hear this question related to use of oak leaves and shredded oak leaves in the garden for mulch. But when it comes down to it, oak leaves really don't have any kind of impact on the soil acidity. And I think that's probably where this question derived from in terms of whether or not it's impacting plant health and plant growth. So it's doubtful that the shredded oak leaves have anything to do with the plants having issues. It could be related to a number of factors. If that right plant is in the right place in terms of the cultural requirements of that plant, in terms of soil drainage, sunlight, position in the landscape, and things like that. But I do not think that the shredded oak leaves are what's causing those issues there.
Okay, thank you, Justin. Okay, the next topic of discussion for today is reading pesticide labels, and this is so important. So we want to talk a little bit about that today and give you some tips to use these products safely. So Debbie, what do you got for us?
Yeah, sure. I'm just following up a little bit. We had Sam Polly on last week, and he was talking about pesticide disposal and how to do it appropriately. And so we've had calls that we received last year. We're receiving them again this year. So we thought it was just a really good idea to go over the concept of pesticides and the labels and what they really mean and how careful you need to be when actually reading a label. So when we say the word pesticide, it means any substance or mixture of substances intended for preventing, destroying, repelling, mitigating any kind of a pest. And so the term cide, C-I-D-E, means to kill. So when we talk about pesticides, we're talking as if it were the term that is overarching that includes herbicides, insecticides, fungicides, miticides, algicides, rodenticides, molluscicides, or however you pronounce that word appropriately. But a lot of those different terms that are listed there in the bulleted sections are a kind of a pesticide. So a lot of times when someone calls and they want to know how to kill something, I'll say, what type of, we'll talk about pesticides. And they're like, no, I'm looking for an herbicide. So we have to, terminology is important when we're talking. So a lot of times we have to make sure that we have the right terms so we know exactly what we're talking about. So if we have a mite, we know we need a miticide. We don't need an insecticide because it's not a true insect. So knowing exactly what we're trying to do to the plant is important to know what type of a chemical or a type of a quote unquote side we actually might need. So moving on from here, we always have to remember that the label is the law. Always remember that. So make sure you read the label and understand exactly what it's going to say. So it's going to have its active ingredients as well as it will classify the others as other ingredients. The other ingredients are not going to be the active part of that pesticide that's going to cause some sort of change to the plant. We also are looking at the mode of action, and the mode of action is how does it actually kill whatever it is you're trying to get after or try to take care of. And a lot of times the mode of action, we talk about it when we look at insecticides. So the mode of action could be, does it cover up their spiracles, their breathing areas of the body? Does it go after the nervous system? Is it a contact? Does it get into their digestive system? So that's the mode of action, is how does it actually kill what it's going to be? When we're looking at plants, it could be a contact or it could be systemic, which means that it goes throughout the entire plant. So mode of action is important to understand. And then what pest is it really used for? So we'll pick up something that might be an insecticide, which is great, but you have to read the label because you might have an insect that you have identified, but that insecticide you picked up may not do anything to the insect you're trying to get rid of or control. So looking at that label will tell you what type of insect it's going to do some sort of a change to or try to kill it. Also with herbicides, some of them will go after and try to kill grass, others will go after broadleaf. And then you have to make sure you know what it is you're actually trying to get rid of. And then, so we talked about what plants it can be used on, and then we talk about PPE. We all know what that is now because of COVID, but personal protective equipment. Always on the label, it's going to tell you, one, how hazardous this particular pesticide is, but it's also going to tell you, do you need to wear gloves, long pants? Do you need a respirator or goggles, something along in that line? And those are on the label to make sure that you protect yourself from the type of chemical that is actually in that particular pesticide. So something that we are discovering over time now within the past couple of years is that there are many types of different products that are out there. So we think of Roundup, we think of Sevin, but we have to step back at this and think about it from a little bit different perspective. So when I say the term Coke or Coca-Cola, everybody knows exactly what I'm talking about, correct? However, we have regular Coke, Diet Coke, 0-calorie Coke, cherry Coke, caffeine Coke. All of those are going to have a different type of ingredients that make that particular Coke be specific to what it is. So we know what a Coca-Cola is. We know that it's going to be a soft drink, but those different types of Coca-Colas will have different ingredients within it. And we're finding now that a lot of the chemical manufacturers are kind of moving in that direction. So we have found that when we say the term Roundup, years ago, it always meant that it had glyphosate in it. Now, if you look at all of the active ingredients on those different items here that say Roundup, and you look at the active ingredients are not going to be the same on each one of those individual Roundup. And that is the case with Sevin. Sevin is the one I'm really going to show you about here. A number of years ago, if we said Sevin, we knew the active ingredient was carbaryl. Well, nowadays, we know that that's not true. So we're looking at the label, we see 130, 150, 500, 500, 2 in 1. All of those should be indicators to you when you look at products out there and you see a brand name like Sevin. Make sure you really read those labels to know exactly what it's going to do. So let's look at Sevin. So like I said, years ago, Sevin was the active ingredient was carbaryl. And so we can see that here. It kills over 65 insects. We're finding now, and I've looked out at Garden Tech is where I looked, which was where all the Sevin products were located. All the products that were there, none of them had carbaryl as part of their active ingredient. So we believe that Sevin now is no longer considered carbaryl because we can't find it on any of their product labels. So here's one that says it kills over 100. Notice the active ingredients. I'm not really good at pronouncing all these chemical names, but you can see them there up on the screen. And so we notice that this has got 2 different chemicals in it. So we have to make sure that we read, because it will say it won't harm plants, it kills above and below certain temperatures, and it tells us what it will and plants that can be actually used on. So we'll go to the next Sevin product. Here we have one. Notice it has 130. Notice this is going to be in a spray bottle. So we know it's different from the previous slide because that looked like it could have been granular types. Notice that the active ingredient is totally different than the slide that we just saw. The other one that we're going to show, it kills 150 insects. This only has 1 active ingredient, but this active ingredient was in the bag with the dry ingredients. So we have to make sure that we look at these labels to know what it is. Notice this one talks about protects, and I can't read what the word is because I covered it up with the blue line there, but insect damage. And so it starts killing immediately upon contact. So reading these labels again is very important. I'm going to keep saying that. Here's another one that's a bottle, looks like it's liquid. and it's going to kill 500. Look at this active ingredient. It has this one, but if we notice and go back to the one where we had the bag with the dry ingredients, this active ingredient was in that dry bag one. So we need to compare these different products back and forth with each other to make sure we know what we really need. This one that has the 2-in-1 is also very important to look at because it's talking about two things, diseases and insects. So it's going to have both types of an active ingredient that's going to be able to take care of both of those. The active ingredient on this one is going to be sulfur. So they're saying that sulfur is going to help to control the insects as well as to help control some of those different diseases. And so if you go out to gardentech.com, you can look up these different 7 products and actually go out to each individual one. And that's where I clipped the active ingredients for this PowerPoint, just to show you that all of these different products are going to be different and they're not going to be identical to what they were in the past. That's all I've got.
Thanks, Debbie. That was some great information and very interesting information. So thanks for sharing that. Okay, so next we are going to talk about blister beetles, and I have received a lot of inquiries about this in the last couple of weeks. I actually seen a video from one of the producers we work with in Southwest Missouri yesterday, and they had a pretty bad infestation. It looked like a biblical plague almost, but they are certainly out and about this year. So Donna, what can you tell us about them?
Yes, they are out and about. We are plagued with striped blister beetles this year, it seems. In previous years, we were seeing a couple of the other species, but this year it's been striped. So we're seeing them pretty well statewide. And I tend to believe being so dry has something to do with why we're seeing so many in our gardens and in our landscapes. And so this is what the blister beetle looks like. This is a specific striped one that seems like everybody's been calling in with. Let me get my computer to work. There we go. Actually, there are 5 blister beetles here in Missouri. Actually, the only 3 that we really see or have problems with is the margined one that's black and gray. And then there's a black one, and it's the third one second one I have circled. And then it's the striped one, of course, the third one that is circled. So occasionally we will see the gray one, but usually if we're seeing them, it's one of the 3 that are circled. And why are they so dangerous? We'll talk about that in a second. But keep in mind, they are native to the U.S. They're an elongated beetle. And what makes them different from other beetles when you're looking at them is they will have that distinct narrow neck. So if you're looking at maybe a lightning bug or one of the little soldier beetles, you might say, well, is that what they're talking about? Look for that narrow neck, and that will that is a big difference between those other species. They're about 1/3 to 2/3 inch of long. And like I said, they come in several colors. What makes them dangerous is they have a blistering substance in them called cantharidin. I can never say this word. Just know that it's a bad substance that causes blistering and burns. When the beetles are alarmed or disturbed, they secrete this chemical that's in the blood. So it will actually come out at the different joints on the beetle. And so if you go up to them and you start, handling them, or they get scared that you're standing beside them, they will start secreting that. And if you get that on your skin, it can definitely cause blistering and tissue damage. And you need to get to the doctor pretty quick because you don't want that stuff on you. Basically, it's that yellow liquid it oozes out, and it can irritate livestock, pets, and humans. The big thing is don't hand pick them. If you do hand pick them, wear plastic or rubber gloves. Don't use cloth gloves because the stuff they're secreting will actually absorb into the gloves, and then it will get on your skin at that point. And so that is a big no-no. You can choose to control them. I know I've ran into a couple of pamphlets that said you don't have to control them. Every time I've ever had them, they decimate my marigolds, they decimate tomatoes. My dahlias really took a hit a couple of years ago. And really, I encourage you, if you want flowers or if you want your vegetables, control them. And so any of those insecticides like Debbie was talking about, the bifenthrin, the cyfluthrin, any of those are what we call a contact insecticide, and those will work. And also beware that dead beetles still have the toxin. So if you're sweeping them up or you're picking them up, still be cautious because you can still get burns. The big thing is, I find, is that they do a lot of damage in a short amount of time. So it's best to try to control them if at all possible. Okay, Kelly, back to you.
All right. Thank you, Donna. Okay, well, we're going to stick with Donna for the next question as well. And this is something that we have all been getting a lot of questions about, especially with the heat and the drought, and that is leaf roll on tomato leaves. So Donna, what can you tell us about that?
Okay, let me get it pulled up. There we go. Okay, so yes, we're getting another thing that we're getting calls for is why are my leaves rolling? And so this is a good example of the leaf roll. So a lot of times you will see the leaf rolling in different patterns and different places on the plant. But today what we're going to talk about is a leaf roll that is happening due to heat stress. I want to point out that leaf roll can also happen for other reasons. So viral infections can cause it, herbicide damage can cause it, root damage, anytime you're hoeing or you do deep cultivation can cause it. If we have excess moisture, so let's say, we had a huge rain after a dry spell, that can cause it, and excessive nitrogen. But today what we're focusing on is the leaf roll from heat or the heat stress. Just keep in mind that older varieties, so such as the heirloom varieties, are more susceptible. They tend to show it a lot more. And what the plant is trying to do is it's trying to reduce that leaf area. So if it reduces the leaf area, it doesn't transpirate or it doesn't lose moisture as fast through its leaves. And so it's just sitting there with rolled leaves, hoping for a break, that it's going to break in heat and also break in drought. Pruning tends to make it worse. And just keep in mind, it's only temporary. So as soon as we come back down on temperatures, just as soon as we get some rainfall, a lot of times it will, your leaves will start to straighten out quite a bit. So what can you do? You can do shading. If you do shade cloth, try to make sure it's no more than a 30% shade. You can also use row covers, the thin insect barrier. It's a white woven material. It also can provide some shading. Cheesecloth can be laid over some of those plants, as well as I know some people will take straw and try to just put the flakes on top of the tomato cages, or they'll take a garden bench and sit over plants, or they'll just do a variety of different things to start shading them just a little bit so that they come out of that stress. Maintain the moisture around the plants. Try to keep the moisture even. And if you haven't mulched your plants, definitely mulch them either with a thick layer of straw, and this is after watering, or mulch them with hardwood bark mulch, or you can use cardboard, newspaper, anything like that will do. Avoid soil disturbance and any cultivation that would go deep into the root system. Anytime we damage the roots, they have a hard time picking up that moisture. And so plants will start to suffer. And also avoid excessive nitrogen. You don't want to push your plants right now. You want to just let them, sit there and hopefully recoup as the weather straightens out and things start to become a little cooler. And how is this different? This leaf roll from herbicide damage? I get that question a lot. Let me try to get this back up to where it shows. Okay. The rolling on the heat stress will be a vertical roll. So the leaf just turns into itself vertically. Whereas with herbicide drift, you're going to be seeing it mainly on the new growth, whereas this heat roll can be on the older leaves as well as some of the newer ones. Herbicide drift will also be twisting and puckering and strapping of leaves. And so you're going to get, it's going to present much differently than just all the leaves folding in on itself vertically. So, all right, Kelly, back to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Donna. Okay, next, Justin is going to share with us about some garden myths that we continue to get questions on, and we thought it would be fun to share some of those with you and talk a little bit about it. So, Justin?
All right. Thanks, Kelly. Yeah, so there's a lot of information out there on the internet, and a lot of questions that we get regarding different things. The leaf mulch, oak leaf mulch is just one example of some of the things that people may hear about over the internet in relation to acidity in the soil. But I have a number of them here that we're going to go over and hopefully demystify a little bit of these questions. So we have some questions related to the use of human hair as a deer repellent and potentially as a fertilizer. So there's lots of anecdotal evidence for use of deer repellent as a deer repellent, but there is no scientific studies that have concluded that human hair is effective as a deer repellent. So University of Minnesota did a number of studies on this and were unable to find any cause and effect relationship to deer damage from the use of hair as a deer repellent. Now, as a fertilizer, human hair does contain a fair amount of proteins, and proteins are comprised of amino acids, which are made up of nitrogen. So human hair does actually contain about 15% nitrogen by weight. It is very slow to break down and release nutrients, so it requires a lot of microbes to break it down and release the nitrogen into a plant's available form. There are some concerns with residues from hair treatments, so whether it be coloring or different chemical residues in hair, that is definitely a concern of putting it in your garden. Feather meal is another alternative if you're looking for a high nitrogen organic fertilizer, which comes out at about 13% nitrogen by weight. So another one that we often hear about is using coffee grounds to lower soil pH and whether or not this is actually effective. So coffee grounds actually on average have a somewhat neutral pH. So there's been a number of studies on this. Sometimes the pH is low, sometimes it's 8.5, so it's more alkaline and less acidic. It does contain organic matter and the carbon, as well as it contains some plant nutrients like nitrogen at about 2% by weight. So it is a good thing to mix in your compost. Anytime we're able to get organic matter into the soil, help build soil structure and feed our soil microbes, that's always a good thing. But studies have shown that there's not really any consistent effect in lowering soil pH. So if you need to lower your soil pH, and I should note most Missouri soils are slightly acidic, but if you're planting things that require a much lower soil pH than neutral, like blueberries and azaleas, elemental sulfur is the most effective way to do that. And you're really going to need to get a soil test to understand where your soil pH is. And sulfur and any kind of material that you're adding to lower pH is really best incorporated into the soil. The more contact it has with the soil particles, the deeper that pH modification is going to go. If it's just placed on the soil surface, it's only going to impact the soil particles at the very upper surface of the soil profile. So coffee grounds to lower soil pH we're going to classify that one as a garden myth. Another one that folks email and call to us about sometimes is using eggshells to prevent blossom end rot. And I believe blossom end rot has probably been touched on at some point in the garden hour, but You can see on the right-hand side this malformation of the fruit that primarily happens at the end of the fruit there. Eggshells are about 95% calcium carbonate, and blossom end rot is caused by a calcium deficiency. However, it's a little more complicated than that because many Missouri soils have sufficient calcium. And the fact is that blossom end rot is actually more related to water and calcium movement in the plant as opposed to calcium in the soil. So a lot of water moves to plant parts that lose a lot of water. So things like plant leaves, there's a lot of transpiration flow in the xylem that pushes a lot of water to those leaves. They lose a lot of moisture through evaporation. But our plant fruits, which have layers of protective layers that prevent so much loss of water, they really don't have nearly as much water moving to those plant parts like our fruits. So because there's less water, there's less calcium moving into those plant parts. And that's when we develop these malformation of plant structures that are characteristic of blossom end rot. So really, when we're thinking about blossom end rot, we need to think about soil moisture management. So providing appropriate irrigation, making sure that that irrigation is even and that soil moisture is maintained at a steady level. Things like organic mulches can be great to help keep that soil moist. And also we want to avoid root damage. So if we're cultivating or weeding too deeply, we can damage our roots pretty readily. And that can cause issues with uptake of water and nutrients down in the root zone. Also, if your soil pH is too low, this can contribute to calcium availability. So with any kind of garden plant, it's always good to get a soil test. And if you are in that acidic range, to go ahead and adjust your soil pH by using lime. Lots of questions about Epsom salts come through as well, related to blossom end rot, as well as just general productivity of peppers and tomatoes. So Epsom salts are magnesium sulfate, and so they have no calcium present. So there would be no effect on blossom end rot, even in calcium deficient soils. Even when soil moisture management is optimized, these Epsom salts are not going to have any effect on on blossom end rot because they do not contain any calcium. Also, if you apply too much magnesium at the root zone, for instance, when you're planting plants, you can actually displace some of the calcium from the soil colloids, such as our clay and humus particles, and make it harder for plants to uptake calcium. Now, in terms of productivity, this really only helps on soils with low magnesium, which tend to be our sandy soils and soils that are very low pH. Most of the soil test interpretations that I've done over the years, I haven't really seen too many magnesium deficient soils in the territories that I've covered, but a soil test can help you tell that. But without knowing whether you need it, I don't suggest applying it. And some folks even use this as a plant spray, a foliar application, and this can be phytotoxic and cause leaf damage on plants. So magnesium sulfate or Epsom salts would only be suggested if you had a soil test that showed you had low magnesium levels. Another one that's been coming into more popularity, I guess, in terms of questions is the use of human urine as a fertilizer. Now, urine does contain the big three macronutrients as well as some other nutrients, but it's important to understand that there are some human pathogens that can be excreted in urine. There have been some studies that showed that pathogenic E. coli can even be excreted in some urine samples. There's also a concern with the pharmaceuticals carrying over from the urine into the soil, into the plants. And it's important to note that under the FSMA produce safety rule, which is our federal guidelines for how produce should be grown safely, this is classified as a human waste and prohibited in the use in vegetable production. Another one, male and female peppers and eggplants. So this is one that comes up pretty much every year. Just questions related about, how do I find a male pepper? How do I find a female eggplant? So all pepper and eggplant fruits, these are all ripened ovaries. And while the peppers and eggplants, while the flowers have both male and female parts present because there are complete or perfect flowers, there is no sex differentiation in fruits. So there are no male or female peppers or eggplants. Oftentimes this question comes up related to bitterness in eggplants in particular. Peppers, it's often related to questions about this male pepper has this many lobes, or a female pepper has this many lobes. But with eggplant, this question often relates to bitterness, and that's really related more to maturity. So eggplants that are shiny, smooth, have shiny, smooth skin and are firm to the touch, these are the eggplants that have not gone too mature. And so that's when it's best to harvest them. When you notice that skin really dulling out, losing some of its tension, those types of eggplants are going to have a lot larger seeds, and they are going to be more bitter. So there are no male female peppers and eggplants, but there are some ways that you can ensure that you have eggplants that are less bitter. So with that is all I have on the garden myths.
Okay, thank you, Justin. Okay, next, Debbie is going to go over a couple of terminology, horticulture terminology that you might not be familiar with. So Debbie, what do you have for us?
Sure. I felt like this was a really good, appropriate term to use for today. It's called heliotropism. And so, Jared, if you could go ahead and start the poll. So what do you believe is the definition of this term? A diurnal or seasonal motion of plant parts in response to the direction, and that my poll popped up in the middle of my words here. So in the middle of so in response to the direction of the sun, or is it wilting of a plant due to high temperatures, high humidity, and lack of water? Or is it excessive growth of a plant during the summer? So I'll give you a minute or so here to kind of figure out which one it might be. Okay. It always amazes me every week when I do this that you guys are so intelligent out there. Okay, I'll give you another couple of minutes, or a couple of seconds rather. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share the results. So 52% of you say that it's A, 26B, and 22C. And so I'll show you what the appropriate answer is for this term. It actually is the movement of a plant, or the facing of a plant, that moves with the sun or moves in the direction of the daylight. So we can kind of talk about it in that sense. And so here is an example of a plant out there, and you can see the sun rising over the horizon, morning, noon, and afternoon, how the plant kind of turns its leaves because it wants to have the full extent of those leaves facing the sun so that it can produce through photosynthesis. And that's the opposite of what Donna was talking about, is that with the leaf curl with tomatoes, those leaves will curl up so that there's less sunlight penetrating onto those leaves. And so it will help with the curling and the lack of moisture or the heat or the sun penetration onto those tomato leaves. But here, when we talk about heliotropism, they really want that full sunlight. So they open up as wide as they can. And so one of the plants that we all think about, and our gardens are probably just going haywire right now, is the sunflower. And if you notice in the morning, your sunflowers are going to be facing kind of in one direction. And if you go out late afternoon, you'll notice that the head of that flower is actually pointed in a little bit different direction from what it was when you looked at it in the morning. And so this is just a natural phenomenon that happens with some of our plants. Doesn't happen with all of our plants, but there is a term for it, and that's heliotropism. So thanks, appreciate it.
All right, thanks, Debbie. Okay, well, that is all of the questions and topics we have for you today. So I will turn it back over to Debbie to close it, or I'm sorry, back over to Donna to close us out for the day.
Hey, Donna, we did have one
Yes.
question that came in the chat, which I'm happy to answer if we have a second.
Yeah, go for it.
So the question was, when should soil testing be done? When should amendments be applied? So soil testing is often done in the fall. It's a good time to do it in the fall because it gives you time to source your amendments, and it also gives you time, if you need to apply, for instance, lime or sulfur. Those materials that are used to adjust pH, they do take time to react with the soil and get the pH at the optimal levels. So things like sulfur and lime you could apply in the fall, but your fertilizers and other amendments you're going to want to wait to apply in the spring. If you apply your fertilizers in the fall, you're going to have issues with runoff. That fertilizer is going to either leach downward in the soil or leach across the soil profile, potentially end up in our rivers, lakes, and streams. So to be a good steward and for optimal fertilizer use, spring application before planting is ideal. And I think that is all we had in the chat box.
All right. So once again, here is the map of all the horticulturists across the state. And like I said, just take note of who's in your area. So let's see, let me get my page to go. Okay. So if you want to save some of those links that were in the chat, all you have to do is, go down, and there's usually 3 little dots at the bottom over to the right, and you click on that and you can save the chat, and it will send it to your Zoom folder, and you can go retrieve them later. Just remember that we are always on YouTube and in the MUIPM webpage. And you can go and watch videos and snippets that have been done over the last year or two. And you can also rewatch any of the noon hours episodes. And so just remember, you can go do that anytime and increase your knowledge. Future sessions will be at noon on Wednesdays. So the next one will be on July 27th. So if you have questions, you want to go back to that web page, and you'll have to fill back out the form and ask your question there. Pretty easy to do. And there's an opportunity to also share a picture. And so that helps us out quite a bit in helping you figure out what the problem is or answer your questions. So once again, I'll leave you with the map, and I hope everybody has a good week, and I hope we get some rainfall. So everybody enjoy the rest of your day and have happy gardening.